The cold, damp air of Lower Wecker Drive always smelled like exhaust fumes and stale urine, but tonight it was heavily laced with copper and brain matter. I wiped a splatter of blood off my Kevlar vest, wincing as a sharp, agonizing throb radiated from my lower left jaw, an impacted wisdom tooth. Add that to the dull, constant ache in my abdomen, my liver practically begging for mercy, and I was having a spectacular Tuesday. "Clear the perimeter," Trent, the chief of security, shouted into his comms. I ignored him, my eyes fixed on the towering figure leaning against the bullet-riddled side of our armored SUV, Dominic Russo, the Don of the Russo Syndicate, the apex predator of Chicago's underworld, and the man I had been shadowing for the past 6 months. Even covered in concrete dust and other people's blood, he exuded a suffocating, intoxicating pheromone cocktail of cedarwood and crushed flint. A purebred alpha, my biology buried under lethal doses of black market omega suppressants screamed at me to bare my neck. My bank account, however, screamed at me to get a root canal. I pulled a crumpled, slightly blood-stained envelope from my tactical pouch and walked over to him. "We need to move, boss," I said, my voice maintaining the flat, emotionless baritone of a loyal beta. "The cops are on payroll, but they cannot ignore a war zone in the loop forever." Dom did not look at me. He was busy ejecting a spent magazine from his Sig Sauer. "Did we lose anyone?" "2 men, Jimmy and Marco." I paused, then held out the envelope. "And as of right now, you are losing a third." Dom's dark eyes finally snapped to mine. He did not take the envelope. The air pressure around us seemed to drop, his alpha aura flaring in a mix of irritation and confusion. "What is this, Jax?" "My 2 weeks' notice. Though given the circumstances, I would like to waive the transition period." Dom stared at me as if I had just spoken to him in ancient Sumerian. The ruthless Mafia boss who had just orchestrated the massacre of half a dozen rival hitters looked genuinely baffled. "Are you out of your mind? You are my lead shadow. Nobody just quits the Russo family, Jackson. What is it? You want more money? A bigger territory?" "I want dental, Dom," I replied deadpan. Silence. Even the distant siren seemed to pause. "Excuse me," Dom asked, his voice a dangerous low sound. "Dental," I repeated, rubbing my jaw. "And comprehensive medical. My wisdom tooth is rotting into my skull, and I am fairly certain my liver is failing from processing cheap, unregulated painkillers because this multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise classifies its enforcers as independent contractors. No 401k, no hazard pay, and definitely no health insurance." It was partially a lie. My liver was failing because I was an omega swallowing toxic suppressants every 4 hours just to survive in an alpha-dominated meat grinder, but the medical bills were very real. The underground clinics charged a premium to keep their mouths shut, and my savings were entirely depleted. I needed out before my body broke down entirely, and my secret spilled out onto the Chicago pavement. Dom blinked. The terrifying Don Russo was currently buffering. "You are quitting my syndicate over a wisdom tooth." "And the liver," I reminded him. "I am sorry, boss. It is just business." Before Dom could process the sheer capitalist absurdity of my resignation, the screech of tires echoed through the subterranean street. 3 black Escalades swerved around the concrete pillars of Lower Wacker. Automatic weapons breached the windows. "O'Banion's crew," I yelled, tackling Dom to the asphalt just as a storm of bullets shredded the side of our SUV. We scrambled behind the reinforced engine block, the deafening noise of gunfire drowning out the city above. Concrete shrapnel rained down on us. I drew my Glock, popped out of cover, and put 3 rapid rounds into the windshield of the lead Escalade. "Cover the flank," Dom shouted loudly, returning fire with lethal precision. I dropped back down to reload my hand, shaking partially from adrenaline, mostly from chemical withdrawal. Another wave of nausea hit me. I needed my pills. I needed a doctor. "Rate of fire is too heavy," I shouted over the noise, slamming a fresh magazine home. "We are pinned." Dom was breathing hard. His custom Tom Ford suit ruined his alpha scent, spiking with adrenaline. He looked at me, his black eyes intensely focused completely, ignoring the bullets ricocheting inches from our heads. "Platinum," he said suddenly. What I fired blindly over the hood. The executive platinum plan, Dom yelled over a burst of submachine gun fire. Full medical vision and premium dental. 0 deductibles. Covers out-of-network underground biomeds. I paused, ducking, as a bullet shattered the side mirror. "What are you talking about? Human Resources explicitly told me security personnel are not eligible." They are not. Dom slammed a new magazine into his gun, racking the slide. But immediate family members of the board are. I stared at him, my brain stalling. I do not have any family on the board. Dom leaned in close, the smell of gunpowder and sharp cedar overwhelming my senses. Marry me, Jax. A grenade exploded somewhere down the block, shaking the ground beneath us, but it did not hit me nearly as hard as those 3 words. Are you insane? I screamed back. They are flanking us. Sign the goddamn verbal contract. Hayes Dom fired twice, dropping a hitter who got too close. Be my husband. You get the platinum insurance, the biomeds, the root canal. I get to keep the best shadow in Chicago. Deal. My tactical mind raced. It was the most ridiculous, unromantic, highly pragmatic business proposal I had ever heard. I looked at the approaching hitters. I felt the agonizing throb in my jaw. I felt the phantom heat of my omega biology threatening to break through. Death by bullets, death by liver failure, or a fake marriage to a terrifying alpha who actually paid for premium health care. I racked the slide of my Glock. Are pre-existing conditions covered? I shouted. Yes, Dom replied loudly, a wild, dangerous grin spreading across his face. Fine, I do, I yelled back, popping out of cover and dropping 2 men in quick succession. Now get in the damn car before I become a widow on my wedding day. As the armored SUV roared to life and we tore out of the subterranean slaughterhouse, I leaned my head against the cold window. I had my insurance. I just did not realize I had just sold my soul and my heavily guarded biology to the devil himself. I sold my soul for a root canal. And the devil, as it turns out, lives in a $40 million penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Less than 24 hours after the shootout on Lower Wacker, the Russo Syndicate's terrifyingly efficient legal team had drawn up the paperwork. I was officially a married man. I went from being an independent security contractor with a failing liver to the Don's consort complete with a shiny new platinum insurance card in my wallet. Dom's penthouse was a sprawling, aggressively modern fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass black marble and cold steel. It looked exactly like the inside of his mind, impenetrable, expensive, and completely devoid of warmth. Make yourself at home, Dom had said, gesturing vaguely to a velvet sofa that probably cost more than my entire childhood home. But there was no time to settle in because hell had followed us up the private elevator. Her name was Dolores. Dolores was a 70-year-old Omega widow who smelled of expensive gin and lavender. She wore a pearl necklace, a Chanel twin set, and the cold, dead eyes of a great white shark. She ran the Russo Syndicate's human resources and internal audit department with the ruthless efficiency of a cartel executioner. Mr. Hayes, Dolores spoke smoothly, sitting across from us in the living room, a thick, terrifyingly detailed clipboard resting on her lap. Or should I say, Mr. Russo? I must admit this sudden elopement is quite irregular. The Platinum Plan is the crown jewel of our corporate benefits. It is not to be exploited. Exploited? Dom asked smoothly, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. He was back in a flawless 3-piece suit, radiating an almost suffocating aura of alpha dominance. Dolores, are you accusing me of committing insurance fraud within my own syndicate? I am merely doing my job, Don Russo, she replied, not intimidated in the slightest. A sudden marriage to an employee, immediately requesting full, out-of-network biomed coverage. The board has questions. Therefore, protocol dictates a standard 72-hour domestic observation period to verify the authenticity of the bond. My stomach dropped. Observation period. I will be staying in the guest suite. Dolores smiled, though it did not reach her eyes, just to ensure this is not a marriage of medical convenience. For the next 2 days, my life became a high-stakes, terrifyingly domestic theater. The primary issue was not the acting. The primary issue was the biology. Being forced into constant close proximity with Dom was an absolute nightmare for my suppressed Omega nature. His scent, that dark, heavy blend of cedarwood and crushed flint, was everywhere. It was in the air vents, on the furniture, embedded in the very walls. My black market suppressants were already struggling to keep my system baseline, and now they were fighting a 2-front war against a purebred alpha in his own territory. You are stiff, Dom whispered one evening as we sat on the couch, Dolores watching us like a hawk from the dining table under the guise of reviewing quarterly reports. Dom slid his arm casually around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. The contact sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down my spine. My inner Omega whimpered, desperate to lean into the heat to bare my neck. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, using the sharp pain to anchor my soldier's discipline. "I am stiff because you are crushing my rib," I muttered back, keeping a painfully bright, loving smile plastered on my face for Dolores's benefit. "Lean into me, Jax. Make it look real," Dom ordered softly, his breath brushing my ear. "Unless you want her canceling your dental appointment tomorrow." I leaned in, resting my head on his broad shoulder, fighting the frantic hammering of my own heart. "Fine, but we need to talk about the deductible on my ruined Glock from yesterday." The enemy shattered the sight. "That is a business expense." Dom laughed softly, a low, vibrating sound that rumbled against my cheek. To Dolores, it looked like a tender moment between newlyweds. "It is collateral damage, Jax. File it under petty cash. And while we are talking finances, who pays for my ruined Tom Ford suit?" "You are a billionaire," I said sharply, smiling sweetly as I slowly pinched his waist. "Write it off as a tax loss. Violence in the workplace is not tax deductible, darling." The verbal sparring was the only thing keeping me sane. If I focused on the sheer capitalist absurdity of our situation, I did not have to focus on how intoxicating he smelled or how dangerously safe I felt tucked under his arm. By midnight of the second day, Dolores finally retired to her suite. The moment her door clicked shut, I collapsed entirely. The adrenaline evaporated, leaving behind the crushing toxic ache in my liver and the throbbing in my jaw. I did not even make it to my designated bedroom. I just slumped onto the ridiculously expensive velvet sofa, utterly drained. "Take your pills," Jax, Dom said, his voice dropping, its teasing edge sounding suddenly very far away. "Yeah, just give me a minute," I mumbled into the cushions. I closed my eyes just for a second. The exhaustion was too heavy. As sleep dragged me under, my ironclad mental barriers finally slipped. The black market suppressants strained to their absolute breaking point by 48 hours of constant alpha exposure faltered just a fraction of a percent. It was a microscopic breach, but in the underworld, microscopic breaches get you killed, or worse. A tiny, unmistakable wisp of pure vanilla laced with the sharp ozone of a brewing storm leaked into the air of the penthouse. I was already half unconscious, but I heard the sudden sharp intake of breath. The barometric pressure in the room seemed to violently crash. I cracked one eye open. Dom was standing perfectly still in the center of the living room. He was not looking at the financial reports anymore. He was staring down at me on the sofa. His eyes, usually a sharp, calculating brown, had dilated until they were entirely terrifyingly pitch black. He took one slow step toward me, his jaw clenching as he inhaled again. The human resources audit was the least of my problems. The devil had just caught my scent. The underground clinic beneath the Gold Coast was not what I expected. Instead of rusty scalpels and flickering fluorescent lights, it looked like a high-end spa complete with espresso machines and smooth jazz. This was the Russo Platinum Plan in action. Dr. Eris, a discreet beta with a very expensive watch, reviewed my blood work with a grim expression. "Your liver enzymes are stabilizing, Mr. Hayes. The root canal is scheduled for Thursday," the doctor said, tapping his sleek tablet. "But your endocrine system is a disaster zone. If you were a car, your check engine light would be on fire." I shifted uncomfortably on the leather examination chair. "Just give me the good pills, Doc. The ones that do not make my hands shake." "You do not understand," Dr. Eris sighed, taking off his glasses. "You have been taking Schedule 2 street garbage for years. Your body has built a massive tolerance. The crash is inevitable. I estimate your first natural heat cycle will hit within the week. And without a bonded alpha to anchor you, it will be violently debilitating. Give me better blockers," I demanded, my voice tight. "Even the best synthetic suppressants take weeks to build up in your system. You do not have weeks, Jackson. You need to prepare." I left the clinic with a bottle of premium zero-side-effect biomeds and a heavy ticking time bomb in my chest. But the real surprise was waiting for me back at the penthouse. When I walked into the kitchen, I found 3 more crates of the exact same ridiculously expensive biomeds stacked neatly on the marble island. Dom was leaning against the counter, casually sipping dark roast coffee, delivery from the syndicate's pharmacy. I picked up a vial. These were military-grade, untraceable endocrine regulators. They cost roughly the price of a small yacht per box. Since when does the Russo syndicate shell out for top-tier biological contraband? Since the union negotiated a better healthcare package for executive spouses, Dom said smoothly, not breaking eye contact over the rim of his mug. "The Mafia has a union. We are very progressive, Jax." I stared at him. The microscopic vanilla slip-up from a few nights ago hung in the air between us like an unexploded grenade. He knew. I knew he knew. But neither of us was pulling the pin. He was not demanding submission. He was just quietly, aggressively financing my survival. "Thank you," I muttered, pocketing the vial. "Do not thank me." "Thank your union representative." Dom set his mug down, his expression hardening back into the ruthless dawn. "Now grab your tactical vest. We have a meeting with the Volkov brothers at the Navy Pier warehouses. Trent says the perimeter is secure." Trent. Just hearing the chief of security's name made my newly stabilized blood boil. Over the past few days, I had caught Trent watching me with narrowed, calculating eyes. He knew something was off about my sudden promotion to husband, and I strongly suspected he was quietly bleeding syndicate secrets to the rival crew. "Trent's perimeter is about as secure as a wet paper bag," I grumbled, sliding extra magazines into my pouch. I was right. The meeting was a spectacular trap. We had not even finished exchanging pleasantries with the heavily armed Volkovs when the warehouse doors blew inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. It was not the police. It was O'Banion's hitters pouring through the smoke with suppressed submachine guns. "Ambush!" I shouted loudly, flipping the massive wooden negotiating table and violently shoving Dom behind it. Gunfire shredded the air, turning the warehouse into a chaotic blender of wood splinters, concrete dust, and lead. I drew my Glock, relying on muscle memory and the clean biomeds in my system. My hands were not shaking anymore. My vision was razor sharp. I dropped 3 hitters in 6 seconds. Left flank, Dom shouted returning fire with his Sig Sauer. His Alpha Aura spiked a heavy, suffocating wave of cedarwood and pure dominance that weirdly settled my own racing heartbeat. We fought back to back, a well-oiled machine of violence, but the rate of fire was too heavy. As I dropped the empty magazine and slammed a fresh one home, a massive hitter dropped from the catwalk above, landing right behind my blind spot. I did not see the serrated combat knife in his hand until it was already arcing violently toward my ribs. I did not have time to dodge. I braced for the cold steel, but the impact never came. A blur of ruined Tom Ford wool intercepted the blade. Dom had violently shoved me aside, taking the combat knife straight into his own left bicep. He did not even flinch. Dom grabbed the hitter's wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped with a sickening break, and put a bullet squarely between the man's eyes. The massive body crumpled to the concrete. I stared at the dark blood rapidly soaking the sleeve of Dom's suit. Panic, sharp and entirely unbeetle-like, seized my throat. "Dom, you took a hit." Dom casually pulled the knife out of his arm with a wet sound and tossed it onto the concrete. He looked at me, his dark eyes glittering with absolute terrifying calm amidst the deafening gunfire. "Relax, Jax." He yelled over the noise, racking the slide of his gun one-handed against his belt. "You are logging overtime tonight. Rate 1.5. And make sure you note in the timesheet that management just saved your life. I expect a performance bonus." "You are a lunatic," I screamed back, popping out of cover to provide suppressing fire. "And taking a knife for me is not covered by my dental plan." 10 minutes later, the warehouse was a graveyard. The surviving hitters had scattered into the Chicago night. We sat in the back of the armored Escalade, speeding away from the docks. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a tense, heavy silence in the cabin. I tore open a high-end medical kit courtesy of the Platinum Plan and began patching Dom's arm. My hands, which had been perfectly steady while shooting men, were suddenly trembling as I cleaned the deep wound. The scent of his blood mixed heavily with the intoxicating cedar of his pheromones. My inner Omega was whimpering, desperate to comfort the injured Alpha. "It is deep," I murmured, wrapping the pressure bandage, keeping my eyes fixed on his arm. "You should not have done that. I am the meat shield Dom. That is my job. You are the Don. You do not take hits for contractors." Dom reached out with his uninjured hand. He gently caught my chin, forcing me to look up. The smug, capitalist Mafia boss facade was completely gone. His gaze was dark, heavy, and completely stripped of lies. "You are not a meat shield, Jax." His voice was a low, vibrating sound that made my suppressed biology hum in response. "And you are not just an independent contractor anymore. You are mine to protect." I tied off the bandage, my breath catching painfully in my throat. The distance between us, both physically and emotionally, had just violently collapsed. The marriage contract might have been fake, but the blood on my hands and the sudden terrifying flutter in my chest were entirely real. And the worst part was I did not want to resign anymore. The annual Chicago Philanthropy Gala, held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House, was essentially a tax write-off disguised as a cocktail party. It was where the city's elite gathered to drink overpriced champagne, aggressively network, and pretend they did not make their billions from extortion and racketeering. Philanthropy is just money laundering with better catering, Jack's Dom had murmured against my ear earlier that evening, adjusting the lapel of my $4,000 Tom Ford tuxedo. Smile for the cameras. It is good for the corporate image. But I could not smile. I was sweating profusely. The premium biomeds I had been chugging like water were losing the war. My internal thermostat was entirely broken. A dull, heavy ache pooled in my lower abdomen, radiating outward like a slow-burning fever. Every time Dom brushed against me, his dark, heavy cedar scent sent electric shocks straight into my bone marrow. My suppressed biology was not just waking up, it was actively trying to tear the door off its hinges. "Boss," I whispered, my voice sounding strained and entirely un-beta-like. "We have a problem. I need to get to the extraction point." "Hold on, Jax. Trent is sweeping the perimeter." Dom did not get to finish his sentence. With a resounding and heavy metallic noise, the massive crystal chandeliers above us went entirely dark. The music died instantly. A second later, the heavy steel security doors of the ballroom slammed shut, locking mechanically. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a bloody, sinister glow. But the most terrifying detail was not the darkness. It was the air conditioning. The gentle hum of the HVAC system ground to a halt, and suddenly the ventilation grates began pumping aggressive, suffocating heat into the sealed ballroom. Trent Dom shouted into his earpiece, his alpha aura instantly flaring with lethal intent. "Report. Static." "That son of a bitch," I said sharply, drawing my concealed Glock from its shoulder holster. "He did not just sell our routes, he sold the gala." The skylights above shattered. Men in tactical gear rappelled into the ballroom, opening fire with suppressed automatic weapons before their boots even hit the marble floor. Screams erupted as billionaires and mob bosses alike scrambled for cover behind overturned catering tables. It was O'Banion's crew. "Get down!" Dom shouted loudly, violently pulling me behind a massive marble pillar as bullets shredded the buffet table we were just standing near. I raised my weapon, aiming at a hitter dropping from a rope. I squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling so violently I could not even disengage the safety. A sudden blinding wave of heat crashed over me so intense it dropped me directly to my knees. The marble floor felt like ice against my burning skin. I gasped for air, but my lungs would not expand. No, not here, not now. The biological dam broke. The black market suppressants, the military-grade biomeds, they all failed simultaneously. A massive, overwhelming scent of pure, intoxicating vanilla, laced heavily with the sharp ozone of a brewing thunderstorm, violently exploded into the enclosed, heated ballroom. It did not just leak, it flooded the space. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Gunfire actually stuttered. In the middle of a heavily coordinated hit, a dozen alpha hitters physically paused. I could hear their sharp intakes of breath. Being an Omega in a war zone was not just dangerous, it was a death sentence. To these men, I was not an enemy combatant anymore. I was a highly valuable, incredibly rare commodity, actively in heat. I was the prize. "Well, well, well," a voice sneered through the smoke. It was an enemy lieutenant, his eyes already dilating with predatory hunger as he tracked the scent directly to our pillar. "Looks like Russo brought a pet to the party." Terror primal and paralyzing seized my throat. I could not shoot. I could not run. My body was betraying me, demanding that I submit, begging for an alpha to claim me to stop the agonizing fever. I curled into a ball on the floor, waiting for the enemy to drag me away by my collar. But I had forgotten who was standing next to me. Dom did not look at me with disgust. He did not look betrayed by my massive lie. He looked at the approaching hitters, and Dominic Russo completely lost his mind. The calculated capitalist Don vanished. In his place stood an apex predator pushed to the absolute edge of feral rage. His alpha pheromones erupted a suffocating, terrifying wave of dark cedar that physically pushed back against the enemy's advance, claiming the entire room, claiming me. Nobody Dom's voice was not human. It was a guttural, demonic shout that shook the marble floor. Nobody breathes his air. Dom stepped out from behind the pillar. He did not bother finding cover. He became a walking meat grinder. He fired his weapon with terrifying mechanical precision, dropping 3 alphas in 3 seconds. When his magazine ran dry, he did not reload. He lunged forward, grabbing a hitter by the throat and snapping his neck with a sickening, effortless break. He was slaughtering them. He was tearing through heavily armed men with his bare hands and a jagged piece of shattered table glass, completely indifferent to the bullets grazing his own suit. He was clearing a bloody, violent path specifically for me. Jack's Dom yelled, appearing suddenly beside me, his face splashed with someone else's blood. "Can you walk?" "It burns, Dom," I cried softly, entirely stripped of my pride. "I have got you," he said in a deep voice. He scooped me off the marble floor with one arm as easily as if I weighed nothing, firing his sidearm with the other. We tore through the service exit, leaving a graveyard behind us. Dom carried me down 3 flights of concrete stairs, kicking open the reinforced steel door of the building's subterranean safe room. He threw the heavy deadbolt, sealing us inside the dimly lit, soundproof concrete bunker. The chaotic roar of the firefight above was instantly silenced. There was no exit, no extraction team, just me violently shivering in a puddle of my own sweat on the cold floor, entirely consumed by the heat. And Dom. He slowly holstered his gun and turned to look down at me, his chest heaving, his eyes entirely pitch black. The ultimate audit of my lies had arrived, and there was no HR department to save me now. They say the hardest part of running a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise is executing a hostile takeover. They are entirely wrong. The hardest part is locking yourself inside a subterranean concrete bunker with a fiercely independent Omega in full heat and actively forcing yourself not to devour him. I am Dominic Russo. For 32 years, I have operated under a single ruthless principle. I see an asset, I assess its value, and I acquire it. But the man currently thrashing on the cold floor of my safe room was not an asset. He was my entire world, and my biology was currently screaming at me to claim him. The air in the bunker was thick, practically saturated with Jackson's scent. It was an overwhelming, intoxicating explosion of pure vanilla, laced with the sharp, crackling ozone of a brewing thunderstorm. To an alpha, that scent was an absolute biological mandate. It was a siren song demanding submission, bonding, and ownership. My canines extended painfully, my vision edged with a feral, predatory red. My fingernails bit so deeply into the meat of my palms that warm blood trickled down my wrists. I welcomed the sharp, localized pain. It was a necessary deductible to pay against the total loss of my sanity. If I touched him now, while he was entirely at the mercy of his fractured endocrine system, I would break the very thing I had spent 6 months meticulously trying to protect. Breathing through my mouth to avoid the intoxicating pheromones, I moved to the emergency medical cache mounted on the wall. I bypassed the standard trauma kits and pulled out a heavy-duty military-grade synthetic suppressant, a highly restricted fever reducer designed to artificially crash an Omega's core temperature during combat scenarios. Dom Jax cried softly, his voice a broken, raspy sound that struck me like a physical blow. He curled tighter into himself on the concrete, his usually sharp, cynical beta facade entirely stripped away. He was shivering violently, his skin flushed and slick with sweat. "Hold still, little ghost," I said through clenched teeth, my voice sounding rough and demonic even to my own ears. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the colossal tectonic effort of holding back my own alpha nature. I found the vein in his neck and injected the serum. Almost immediately, Jax gasped. The violent shivering began to subside as the synthetic chemical aggressively countered the biological fire in his veins. He slumped against the floor, his breathing evening out into a heavy, exhausted rhythm. He was safe from the fever, but he was not safe from me. Not yet. I stood up, backing away from him as if he were a live grenade. I retreated to the far corner of the bunker, stepping behind the heavy floor-to-ceiling steel mesh partition used to secure the armory. I pulled the massive sliding metal door shut and threw the deadbolt. I deliberately locked myself inside the cage. It was the ultimate irony of the underworld, the apex predator locking himself up to protect the prey. I slid down the cold steel bars, resting my head against the metal, and waited for the audit to begin. It took 20 minutes for Jax to regain lucidity. I heard the rustle of his ruined tuxedo jacket. He groaned, sitting up slowly and rubbing his temples. The fever reducer had worked, stabilizing his system enough to bring his sharp, tactical mind back online. He looked around the dimly lit bunker, his eyes eventually finding me behind the steel mesh. He froze. The realization of what had just happened in the ballroom upstairs hit him simultaneously. He remembered the scent. He remembered the loss of control. "You are in a cage," Jack said, his voice hoarse, completely ignoring his own compromised state. "Standard risk management protocol, Jax," I replied casually, though my chest was still heaving. "I am currently an extreme biological liability to your well-being, so I placed myself in quarantine." Jack stared at me, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He looked at his own trembling hands, then back at me. "I leaked. The suppressants failed Dom. I am an Omega." "I know," I said quietly. Silence stretched between us, heavier than the reinforced concrete ceiling above. "You know," Jax echoed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The mercenary was waking up. "Since when?" "Since the day you broke Trent's jaw in your job interview 6 months ago," I confessed, leaning casually against the steel bars. "You are a brilliant shadow, darling, a tactical genius, but your black market suppressants are a walking medical malpractice suit. They masked your scent, sure, but your pulse rate, your micro-expressions, you could not hide the biology from me. I smelled the vanilla on day one." Jax pushed himself up to his feet, his jaw clenching. "If you knew I was an Omega, why the hell did you let me work the front lines? Why did you not fire me? Or worse, why did you not use me?" "Because you did not want to be used, and you did not want to be fired. You wanted to be a soldier," I said, my voice softening, shedding the ruthless Mafia Dawn persona. "You think you are the only one who knows how to run a covert operation. Jackson, you are the most stubborn, fiercely independent creature I have ever met. If I had offered you protection, you would have quit. If I had offered you my money, you would have thrown it in my face. You would have run." Jack stopped, his eyes widening slightly as the pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. "The lower whacker shootout," Jax breathed out. "The resignation, the insurance." "Exactly." I smiled a dark, fond smile. "You gave me the perfect loophole. Dental insurance, a platinum healthcare plan to save your failing liver. That was a highly logical corporate merger you could not possibly refuse. I did not marry you for a tax write-off, Jax. I married you so I could legally, completely, and financially protect you without bruising your massive ego." Jack stood perfectly still in the center of the bunker. I waited for the anger. I waited for the betrayal. I waited for him to accuse me of manipulating him. Instead, a slow, entirely unexpected smile pulled at the corner of his bruised lips. He did not run away. He walked directly toward the armory cage. He stopped inches from the steel mesh, his scent still sweet, still lingering, but now laced with a sharp, thrilling edge of pure confidence. Jax reached his hands through the steel bars, gently gripping the lapels of my blood-stained shirt, pulling me forward until our faces were separated only by the cold metal. "You are a manipulative, calculating capitalist bastard," Dominic Russo Jax whispered, his eyes locked onto mine. "I have a fiduciary duty to protect my best assets," I murmured back, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. Jax smiled, a genuine, breathtaking sight in the bloody gloom of the bunker. "Tell me something." Boss Jax spoke softly, his thumbs brushing against my collarbone. "Does this platinum insurance plan of yours cover the immediate out-of-network services of a bonded alpha?" The fever finally broke at exactly 5 a.m. I opened my eyes, staring up at the reinforced concrete ceiling of the bunker. I did not wake up in a cage, and I did not wake up as a broken, submissive plaything. For the first time in a decade, my bloodstream was completely free of synthetic black market garbage. There were no hand tremors, no chemical nausea, just the crisp, terrifyingly clear realization that my biological hurricane had passed, and I was still the deadliest shadow in Chicago. I sat up slowly. Dom was leaning against the steel mesh of the armory cage, casually wiping down the slide of a combat shotgun with a bloody rag. His Tom Ford suit was utterly destroyed, but he looked completely at peace, radiating the calm, satisfied aura of a CEO who had just successfully executed a massive corporate merger. "Good morning, darling," Dom said deeply, not looking up from the weapon. "How is the Platinum Healthcare Plan working out for you?" 5 stars. "Highly recommend," I replied, my voice raspy but steady. I pushed myself off the floor, feeling an entirely new, thrumming energy under my skin. The heavy scent of cedarwood no longer made me want to collapse, it made me want to fight. but I think we need to discuss a major restructuring of our security department, starting with the immediate liquidation of Trent. Dom smiled a terrifying, shark-like grin. He tossed me a fresh Kevlar vest and an FNP-90 submachine gun from the cache. I was hoping you would say that. Trent and the remaining O'Banion leadership are currently holding an emergency board meeting at a defunct meatpacking plant in the West Loop. Are you medically cleared to return to work, Jax? I caught the weapon, checking the action with expert precision. Boss, I am ready to collect my blood dividends. We did not call for backup. This was an internal audit, and we were the only accountants required. 20 minutes later, Dom's armored Escalade smashed through the rusted chain-link gates of the O'Banion meatpacking plant. Standard breach, and clear, Dom asked, kicking his door open. No, I said, stepping out into the freezing Chicago air. I slung the P-90 over my shoulder. Standard tactics are for betas. I'm going to try a new corporate strategy, biological warfare. For years, I had spent thousands of dollars trying to erase my scent, but today, I was not going to hide it. I took a deep breath, dropped the massive ironclad mental walls I had built around my endocrine system, and aggressively pushed my pheromones outward. A heavy, intoxicating shockwave of pure vanilla and crackling storm clouds violently exploded from my skin, flooding the loading dock and seeping into the factory floor. It was a biological denial of service attack. We kicked open the heavy double doors. The warehouse was packed with heavily armed hitters, all purebred alphas and betas. The moment my scent hit their olfactory receptors, absolute chaos ensued. In a combat zone, an alpha's brain is hardwired to process adrenaline, blood, and fear. Pumping the concentrated scent of an unbonded, highly desirable omega directly into that high-stress environment caused an immediate catastrophic system failure in their predatory instincts. Guns lowered. Several men physically stumbled backward, their pupils dilating in severe confusion. They were looking for a mate to claim, but all they saw was a heavily armed mercenary in a tactical vest pointing a submachine gun at their faces. Hostile takeover, I whispered and pulled the trigger. It was a slaughter. The biological flashbang gave us a full 3-second advantage, which in the underworld was an eternity. Dom moved like a grim reaper, his own terrifying cedar scent lashing out to crush the disoriented alphas. We fought back to back, a perfectly synchronized machine of violence. I provided suppressing fire, weaponizing my pheromones to keep the enemy completely off balance, while Dom executed the close quarters acquisitions. We tore through the facility, leaving a trail of shattered glass, empty brass, and dead mercenaries. Finally, the gunfire ceased. We stood in the center of the main processing floor, surrounded by hanging sides of beef and the ruins of the enemy empire. I dropped a spent magazine, breathing heavily. The adrenaline was peaking, mixing with the overwhelming possessive alpha aura Dom was projecting. Dom turned to me. He did not look at the bodies. He looked at my neck. He dropped his shotgun. In 2 massive strides, he crossed the bloody concrete, grabbed me by the lapels of my tactical vest, and slammed me against a metal pillar. It was not an act of violence. It was a desperate primal claim. The observation period is over, Jax, Dom said in a deep voice, his eyes completely black. I am finalizing the contract. He did not wait for a verbal confirmation. Dom buried his face in the crook of my neck, his jaw unhinging slightly, and his teeth sank deeply into my scent gland. A blinding, euphoric jolt of electricity shattered my vision. I gasped, my hands flying up to grip his broad shoulders as the bond cemented. It was not just a mark. It was a permanent, biological non-compete clause signed in blood. His cedarwood scent violently merged with my vanilla, creating an entirely new, terrifyingly dominant aura that screamed absolute ownership. When he finally pulled back, wiping a smear of blood from his lip, I was breathless, my knees trembling, but I had never felt more powerful. "You guys are sick," a pathetic, trembling voice echoed from the catwalk above. I looked up. Trent, the traitorous chief of security, was leaning over the railing, bleeding from a shoulder wound, clutching a pistol with shaking hands. He stared at the bite mark rapidly bruising on my neck, his face pale with horror. "He is just an Omega Russo. You are letting a pet run your syndicate." I did not argue. I did not get angry. I just calmly raised my P-90, utilizing the flawless, stabilized vision that my new Alpha Bond provided. "I am not a pet, Trent," I said, my voice carrying the cold, deadpan echo of the Reaper himself. "I am the managing partner, and your contract has just been officially terminated." I squeezed the trigger. A single 3-round burst took Trent perfectly in the center of his chest. He tumbled over the railing, crashing onto the concrete floor below. Dom wrapped a heavy possessive arm around my waist, pulling my marked throat against his shoulder. He looked at the wreckage of the syndicate, then down at me with a soft, incredibly fond smile. "Excellent cost-cutting measure, darling," Dom murmured. "Let us go home and file the paperwork." 1 year later, the only thing actively threatening my life was the Internal Revenue Service. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Russo penthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the black marble coffee table. I was sitting cross-legged on the ridiculously expensive velvet sofa, surrounded by a mountain of receipts, W-2S, and 1099 tax forms. I took a sip of my organic green tea. My hands were perfectly steady. My liver enzymes, according to Dr. Eris's latest report, were functioning at the level of an Olympic athlete. My jaw no longer throbbed thanks to an impeccably executed, fully covered root canal. I was completely free of black market suppressants. Life under the Russo Platinum Plan was admittedly spectacular, but the corporate bureaucracy was still a nightmare. "Dolores, listen to me," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose as I spoke into my phone on speaker mode. Section 162 of the tax code clearly allows deductions for ordinary and necessary business expenses. I am the managing partner of security operations. Therefore, 500 rounds of 9mm armor-piercing ammunition should absolutely qualify as office supplies. Mr. Russo Hayes, Dolores's voice crackled through the speaker, as dry and unforgiving as a desert wind. The IRS does not recognize turf wars or hostile syndicate takeovers as legitimate corporate activities. You cannot write off military-grade ballistics under petty cash. It is a consumable good. "Dolores," I argued, gesturing wildly at a receipt from an underground arms dealer. "We consumed them, mostly into the engine blocks of the Volkov brothers convoy last month. And what about Dom's ruined Tom Ford suits? Can we claim uniform depreciation?" "Violence in the workplace is not a tax-deductible expense," Jackson, a deep voice, interrupted. I looked up. Dom strolled into the living room carrying 2 mugs of freshly brewed dark roast coffee. He was not wearing his terrifying Mafia Dawn armor today. He was in a pair of gray sweatpants and a loose black Henley that did absolutely nothing to hide the massive, heavily scarred muscles of his chest. He looked entirely too relaxed for a man who ran a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire. But then again, he had successfully monopolized the entire Midwest underworld, and his biological mate was sitting in his living room doing his taxes. He had won capitalism. The heavy, comforting scent of cedarwood wrapped around me, instantly neutralizing my tax-induced stress. My biology, now healthy, unsuppressed, and blissfully bonded, practically purred in response. A soft, sweet wave of vanilla rolled off my skin, greeting him automatically. "I'm just trying to maximize our quarterly returns, boss," I grumbled, taking the mug he handed me. Dom laughed softly. He set his coffee down and casually plucked the phone from the table. "Dolores, it is Dominic. Put the ammunition under aggressive marketing and write the ruined suits off as public relations overhead. Have the legal team bury it in the offshore shell company." "Very well." Don Russo Dolores sighed, though I could hear a microscopic hint of fond amusement in the old shark's voice. "I will finalize the filings. Have a pleasant weekend." Dom hung up, tossing the phone onto the pile of tax forms. He did not sit on the empty side of the massive sofa. Instead, he stepped between my knees, leaning over to cage me in against the cushions. "You work too hard, darling," Dom murmured, his dark eyes dropping to my lips. "It is a Sunday. The syndicate can survive a few hours without its bloodthirsty Omega. I am a responsible fiduciary," I countered, though my breath hitched as his heavy hand settled on my waist. "Someone has to make sure this family stays financially solvent. Do you know how much a box of premium biomeds costs without a copay?" "I do not care," Dom whispered. He lowered his head, pressing his face into the crook of my neck. I tilted my head back, automatically offering up my throat. His lips brushed over the permanent, slightly raised scar on my scent gland, the physical proof of his absolute claim and my absolute surrender. A rush of pure, euphoric electricity shot down my spine, the biological feedback loop of a bonded pair cementing our connection. It was still surreal to me. The underworld had initially thought Dom was insane for bonding with his beta-turned Omega bodyguard. They thought I would make him weak. They were catastrophically wrong. The Vanilla Reaper, as the lower-ranking hitters had started calling me behind my back, was a terrifying addition to the board. Without the toxic suppressants crippling my system, my natural tactical abilities had multiplied. I did not hide behind Dom. I stood beside him. When rival bosses sat down at the negotiating table, they had to deal with Dom's suffocating dominant cedar aura, perfectly synchronized with my sharp, crackling storm cloud pheromones that completely short-circuited their instincts. We were an impenetrable corporate monopoly. I think I am due for an annual performance review. I spoke softly, tangling my fingers into Dom's dark hair as he continued to leave a trail of warm kisses along my jawline. I successfully completed the Obanian merger, I streamlined the smuggling routes, and my biological compliance is currently at 100%. Dom pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. The ruthless, calculating mob boss was entirely gone, replaced by a man who looked at me like I was the only thing keeping the earth spinning on its axis. Your performance has vastly exceeded all corporate expectations, Mr. Russo Hayes. Dom smiled a slow, devastatingly handsome smirk. In fact, the board has authorized a massive, highly personalized bonus, effective immediately. Is it hazardous duty pay? I asked, a wicked grin spreading across my face as I pulled him down by the collar of his Henley. No, Dom said deeply against my lips, his scent flaring into a dark, intoxicating wave of pure desire. It is a comprehensive benefits package. As he kissed me entirely, wiping my mind of tax brackets and ammunition receipts, I let myself sink into the warmth of the man who had bought my loyalty with health insurance and kept my heart with his soul. I had started this journey as a broken, dying ghost, desperately trying to survive in a world that wanted to own me. But as Dom's arms wrapped tightly around me, holding me like his most prized, invaluable asset, I realized the absolute truth. The most profitable, life-altering contract I had ever signed in my entire existence did not begin in a boardroom. It began in the middle of a gunfight entirely because of a rotting wisdom tooth. 5 stars, highly recommend.